Welcome, everybody. This is Mile 2's celebration of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is today, May 19th. We have a lineup of some lightning talks that are around the topic of accessibility, and thank you for joining us. We wanted just to point out that we do have an event code of conduct as we are inviting people from outside of Mile 2 in to join us. It was a part of the site that you had to agree to join this event. So if we do find anything that happens to end up against our code of conduct, we will be removing people, just FYI. So I will introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Renesta. She is a senior software engineer here at Mile 2 and will be giving us a talk on POUR Explained, a beginner's guide to accessibility. Take it away, Ren.
All right, let me find my slides. There they are. All right, so as said before, I'm Renesta. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm a senior software engineer at Mile 2. Today, we will be exploring the POUR acronym, representing the top-level principles in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So, what is POUR and why should I care? As stated before, POUR, P-O-U-R, is an acronym that represents top-level principles within the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These guidelines, commonly referred to as WCAG, define how to make web content more accessible to people with disabilities. In WCAG 2.1, there are 4 principles with 13 guidelines spread amongst them, all with their own success criterion. Now, it is important to learn about these guidelines because accessibility provides freedom and empowerment to users with disabilities. Our letter definitions are as follows. P is for perceivable, O is for operable, U is for understandable, and R is for robust. All right, so let me level with you. Each success criterion in POUR has a conformance level. There are 3 levels of conformance. Level A, this is the lowest level and the fewest people considered. Level AA and level AAA, the highest level with the most people considered. Level AA is the most common level of conformance. This being so because it is achievable and it is meaningful. But as it falls short for considering everyone, it is essential to strive to meet all levels of conformance and consider level AAA as much as possible in design and development processes. So let's move into our guidelines. The P in POUR is for perceivable. So this means information and the user interface components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. This means that important information needs to be presented in multiple ways so that the user of any type can gain access to it. Some examples of different types of users are screen reader users, keyboard-only users, and mobile device users. The perceivable principle. This is the first of the top-level principles, denoted with a 1 at the start of the WCAG number system. The perceivable principle houses 4 of the 13 guidelines, starting with 1.1, and probably the most common, text alternatives. So this means providing text-based alternatives for non-text elements. If an image has provided context or essential information, use the alt parameter to describe this. Or you could provide a title tag for SVGs. If the image is decorative, set the alt parameter to an empty string and give it a role of presentation. 1.2, time-based media. This means providing alternatives for time-based media, such as captions, sign language, interpreters, or transcripts. 1.3 is adaptable. This means creating content that can be presented in different ways without losing information or structure. A good way of setting this guideline up is by using simple layout methods. Do not use CSS to change your layouts. And 1.4, distinguishable. We want to make it easier for our users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. Some examples of this is using a minimum contrast level, and not only using color to denote important information. And then on to the next one. The O in POR means operable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. This means the user needs the ability to successfully use the forms, controls, navigation, or any interactive elements available on the site within reason. Essentially, the user must be able to operate the interface. So this principle is the second of the top level principles, also denoted with 2 at the beginning of our WCAG number system. The Operable Principle houses 5 out of the 13 guidelines. 2.1 is keyboard accessible. We want to make sure all functionality is available from a keyboard. Using proper tabbing indexes is an example of helping with this principle. And also, do not trap the focus without a way out. 2.2, enough time. We want to provide our users with enough time to read and use the content. Some examples are giving ways to adjust timers or allowing for pausing, stopping, or hiding moving content. 2.3, seizures or physical reactions. Do not design content in a way that is known to cause seizures or physical reactions. Avoid flashing lights or avoid animations triggered by interaction. 2.4, navigable. Provide ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. Ways of doing this is providing a way to skip the navigation in tabbing. So providing a skip link to skip over commonly used navigation throughout pages so you can get to the main content faster. Also, using headings and labels in a proper hierarchy structure. 2.5, input modalities. We want to make it easier for users to operate functionality through various inputs beyond the keyboard. An example of this is giving interactive elements enough space for interaction. So buttons should usually have at least 44 pixels by 44 pixels in width and height. The U in POR is for understandable. Information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable. This means that there must be consistency in visual order as well as the DOM order, because this is the order it would be read in. The behavior of the user interface must be predictable. There should be a bit of instruction or meaningful context involved when it comes to interactive elements. So this is the third top level principle, denoted with a 3 at the start of the WCAG number system. The Understandable Principle houses 3 out of the 13 guidelines. 3.1, readable. We want to make sure our text content is readable and understandable. Some examples of helping with this is providing a default language to the page or specific parts that may have a different language. Also, providing help for unusual words or abbreviations. 3.2, predictable. We want to make sure our web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. Some examples of this is providing consistent navigation or identification. Also, do not change context on a focus change or automatically with a settings input without a warning. 3.3, input assistance. We want to help our users avoid and correct mistakes. Give instructive labels to interactive elements. Give suggestions or instructions when there are errors present within the form. And provide ways to check, confirm, or backtrack any form input. And finally, the fourth letter is R. R in poor is for robust. So content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. This means that users must be able to access the content as technologies advance. So as technologies and user agents evolve, the content should be remain accessible. This being the fourth and final top-level principles, it is denoted with a 4 at the start of our WCAG number system. The robust principle houses only one out of the 13 guidelines. 4.1, compatible. We want to maximize the compatibility with the current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. We want to make sure our content is readable by past and future accessible technologies. We can do this by using unique IDs, making sure that our markup language is properly written with beginning and ending tags, making sure that our names and roles can be programmatically determined, as well as our values. We want to make sure that those can be programmatically set. Additionally, any status messages that are received, we want those to be able to be programmatically determined so they can be presented to our users by assistive technology. So that is poor, and I hope that that introduction will help you understand some of the other presentations coming up.
Thank you, Ren. I did forget to mention at the beginning, we're going to go through all 3 of our presentations and then have a time for Q&A at the end. So if you have anything that you wanted to know more about, just jot down your questions and we will have some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, I'll introduce our second presenter. And she did say that she's okay if I mess up her last name. Our next presenter is Kasey Bonifacio. She is a technical director at Sparkbox, and she will be giving us the presentation, WCAG, Who's Testing What? Take it away, Kasey.
Thank you. Just share my screen. All right, hopefully you can see everything okay. If not, just yell at me. So I'm Kasey Bonifacio. I am a technical director, like she said, with Sparkbox. I'm also a certified professional in web accessibility. And today I want to talk about accessibility testing. And we're going to talk about that with a story. Excuse me. So I'm going to start with some scenarios. These might seem familiar to you. Let's say your team has recently redesigned and deployed a new small screen navigation for your website, And after a while, you get a complaint that that flyout navigation is just not keyboard accessible. Once navigation has been open, users just can't tab to the items inside of it, or at least they can't see that they're tabbing through them. Or maybe you notice that the images on your latest blog post are missing alternative text. And when you look in the back end of your content management system, you notice that all of the images in your media library are missing alternative text. Or maybe your development team is given some typography styles from design, and one of those styles just cannot be used on a dark background. And later on, a new component is created, excuse me, which will use this typography style, of course, on a dark background, meaning it's inaccessible for some people. I don't think anyone would be surprised if I said that we can prevent these scenarios with some accessibility testing. But even if you are testing, some issues might fall through the cracks if you don't have the right people testing the right things. So let's see what we can do to fix that. To prevent these scenarios, we need to ask ourselves two questions. And the first question is going to be, who should be testing for accessibility? And the answer to that, anyone on your team who contributes in any way to any part of the website. So easy, right? Well, let's dig into that a little bit. And I'm going to borrow a tool from UX designers of user personas, right? User personas are commonly used to create like a profile of like the average user. It gives you ideas of like maybe how they're going to use your website or your product. So let's use the idea of user personas and create user personas for your team. We can ask ourselves, what are the different roles on our website team? What is each role responsible for? How do they interact with or contribute to the website? And then how do they interact with each other? So answering these questions, I've made up some fake user personas. On our team, we have a content creator. This person's responsible for all the text and images and video on the website. They, are responsible for creating the page hierarchy and the structure of the content. And they're going to work primarily in the content management system. That's how they, input the content and maybe adjust the navigation. They collaborate with the designer when they need a new design for new content type, and they might also collaborate with the developer a little bit, mostly asking questions on how to use the CMS. Then we have our designer. They're going to be responsible for design, making sure things adhere to brand guidelines. They're collaborating with, of course, our content creator, but also the developer to make sure that they understand how design should be implemented. And then we have our developer, right? They do developer things, they maintain the code base, they build stuff. And then finally, we have a QA tester. These are the folks that are there to catch all the things before they make it to production. And then they're probably going to collaborate with some other folks on the team. So we have our 4 user personas, and we know exactly what role they play in building the website and how they interact with folks. Excuse me. So now we can move on to the next question. What should they be responsible for testing? They need to test any part of the website that's related to their role. So to dig into that a little bit, we need WCAG. And WCAG has something called success criteria. So Ren just went over the 4 core principles, right? And those are broken up into 13 guidelines, but they're also further broken up, these individual guidelines, into success criteria. And there's quite a few of them. If we were to look at guideline 1.2, which is time-based media, we can see that they have 1.2.1 and so on, and these are the success criteria. These are the individual things that we can test, and we can turn them into what is basically a testing checklist, which I've done. So I'm actually going to move out of my slides and over into this spreadsheet, which is shareable. You can grab this bit.ly link if you like, or I think we'll share things out at the end. But this is just a spreadsheet. We have every single one of those 78 success criteria in each of the rows. And then over here, we have columns for our user personas, right? We have our content creator, designer, developer, and so forth. So now that we know exactly what they do, how they interact with the website, we can start to look at, excuse me, which of these items they are responsible for. So this first one, text alternatives, right? We want anything that's non-text, images, video, has to have some kind of a text equivalent. So this is where we're going to prevent that text or alt text issue that we ran into earlier. This definitely falls under content creator, right? If they are responsible for including images and creating images for content, then I'm going to check this. I think that this is something that they need to keep an eye out for. Designers are off the hook on here, right? They don't need to really care about alt text because they're working in some kind of design software. Moving over to my developer, I know that they're in the code base, right? Some of these images are going to be hard coded. Usually you don't have like a logo as something that's editable in a content management system. So I think developers need to keep an eye out for that as well. And then our QA testers, they should know that we also need alt text for our images. So this is something that they should also keep an eye out for testing. So I'm going to run through all 78 of those, not right now, but this is what you would do for your team. And, just create this checklist. And this is something that each person in the role can go back, and now the content creator, they can kind of ignore what the designer, developer, and QA tester are doing. They can focus on the things they need to keep an eye out for. And that's kind of my system for making sure that we're, catching all of the little things before they make their way into production. So jumping back here, when we share this, I do have some resources at the end of the slide, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasey. That's great. I really liked that spreadsheet. I am going to now introduce our third speaker. Heather Taylor is a UI UX designer at Lumen Learning, and she will be presenting her top 10 tips and tools for accessible interface designs. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Jen. As Jen mentioned, I am Heather Taylor. I work as a UI UX designer at Lumen Learning, and I have a background in design and development. I'm also an IAAP certified professional in web accessibility, and today I'm going to be sharing with you 10 tips and tools for accessible interface designs. A 2022 WebAIM report on accessibility of the top 1 million homepages found that 96.5% of all accessibility errors fall into 6 categories. Those categories are low contrast text, missing alternative text for images, empty links, missing form input labels, empty buttons, missing document language. The tools I'm going to be sharing with you today will help you in addressing just a few of these issues. Today, I'll be sharing some of the tools that I have used for color contrast, content, distinguishable text, and documentation. A quick note before we begin, each slide includes a link to the tool that I'm going to be sharing, and these slides will be made available to everyone after this presentation. So our first tool is Accessible Color Palette Builder. Building an accessible color palette is the ideal place to start. The Accessible Color Palette Builder displays color combinations which meet a color contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. This color contrast ratio meets the standards of Section 508 and WCAG level AA for body text less than 18-point regular or 14-point bold weight. Let's zoom in for a closer look. This slide shows the accessibility of each color in the palette when used as text against all the colors in the palette when used as a background. The top column shows each color, and actually I should say the top row, the very top row, shows each color in the palette when used as text. And the column to the left shows each color in the palette when used as a background. When we look at the intersection of each color combination, if the color combination fails to meet the color contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1, a gray box with a white diagonal line through it will display. Number 2, Figma plugins. This one's called Contrast. Plugins are a great way to check color contrast. Contrast by the Mark design team is my favorite Figma color contrast plugin. Let's take a closer look. The Contrast plugin provides a contrast ratio for the text color and its background and displays whether the combination passes or fails WCAG AA and AAA guidelines. The graphic on this slide shows a white text within an indigo blue button. The text is selected and a pop-up box with the contrast plugin results sit to the right side of this slide. The plugin displays a passing contrast ratio of 4.67 to 1, which means the criteria for AA normal text, large text, and graphics, and AAA it meets the criteria for AA normal text, large text, and graphics, and AAA for large text. The color contrast of the white button text on the blue indigo background of the button fails to meet the criteria for AAA standards. Next, we're going to talk about contrastratio.com. What if you don't use Figma or you don't want to download a plugin? Contrastratio.com is your friend. As a front-end developer, this was my go-to color contrast tool. I love the simplicity of this interface. You can input color names, hex code, RGB, RGBA, HSL, and HSLA values. The large green circle that sits between the background and the text color input fields displays a contrast ratio of 12.79, which passes WCAG AA and AAA standards. If the color combination failed to meet the WCAG color contrast standards, the large green circle would be either orange or red, depending on that contrast value. Next, we have number 4 in our tools and tricks. Tools and tips. We almost called this tools, tips, and tricks, but that would have been way too much. Is Adobe Color. Adobe Color has an accessibility tool which determines whether or not a combination of up to 5 colors is colorblind safe. So let's take a closer look at this one. On this slide, the first row of colors on this screen is our color palette of like a pea green color, bright red, yellow, blue, and a hot pink. The second and third rows of these colors display what our color palette would look like to a person with red-green color blindness. The bottom row of colors display what our color palette would look like to a person with blue-yellow color blindness. So you can see specifically why I pulled out the pea green and the red. And if you draw your eye down to those with the red-green color blindness, you can see how it kind of has shades of like a army or an olive green color is what they would see. And then the same with when we're looking at the columns for D and C on the slide, and you're looking at the yellow and the blue, and then you look at the very bottom row for someone with yellow-blue color blindness, how those colors really change. Next, we're going to share the future of color contrast and testing color contrast. This is the Advanced Perceptual Contrast Algorithm, also known as APCA, and it's a new way to compute contrast based on modern research on color perception. Compared to WCAG 2.1, AA and AAA color contrast guidelines, APCA is more context dependent. Relative to font size and weight, APCA reports contrast as an LC value. LC is lightness contrast, from an LC value of 0 to 106 for dark text on a light background and 0 to 108 for light text on a dark background. So let's take a closer look at another color combination and what APCA will offer in the future. So here we have, this slide shows a comparison of lightness contrast value of hot pink text on a white background and the reverse of white text on a hot pink background. Note the difference in the lightness value. The lightness contrast value of white text on the hot pink background is 56, whereas the lightness contrast value of hot pink text on a white background is 50.8. In this example, the hot pink text on a white background is easier to read, and the lightness contrast value and the recommended minimum pixel values for the various font weights reflect that. So I'm really excited to see what this means for the future of color contrast and the things that we can do to improve our work. Number 6, readability test. So now we're going to talk about some content tools. The readability test by WebFX is a quick and easy way to gauge the readability of your work. You can enter the URL of your website, copy and paste text, or enter a link to a specific section or page on your website. And it just gives you a quick value. I put in here pbskids.com, thinking that that should give us a really, really high value for readability. And it does. We're looking at 86.8. And it's saying that that should be easily understood by 9 to 10-year-olds. The next thing I'm going to share is the Hemingway app. The Hemingway app provides a bit more information, but still in a clean, simple interface. It includes grade level readability, word, character, sentence, and paragraph count, and the average reading time. One of my favorite features is the positive feedback that it provides. See the areas highlighted in light blue and light green that call out when a goal is met. The app also offers suggestions on how to simplify complex words and phrases. Next, the next content app that I'm going to share is called Readable. So if you're looking for a tool that does it all, Readable is it. So I'm going to go to the next slide so we can get a closer look. Readability provides information on readability grade levels, readability scores, text statistics, spelling, grammar, long sentences and words, writing style, text density, audience reach to the general public, average time to read and speak, and text composition. Personally, I really appreciate the tooltips, which provide additional information on the different methods of measurement that are listed. Number 9 is the good line height. Increased space between lines, words, and letters can improve the readability of content for people with low vision, dyslexia, and cognitive disabilities. The good line height is a great tool for visualizing and picking a good line height. And finally, number 10, I could not share a slide presentation with all of my favorite things without sharing something on documentation. I am a huge fan of documentation, so of course it was important for me to include it. The Alley annotation kit was created by the design team at Indeed and Stephanie Hagedorn, who is the UX design lead at Indeed. They use this library at GAAD to help designers document accessibility considerations to share with developers when handing off their designs. It's quick and easy to add callouts for their elements, indicate focus order, or specify keyboard interactions. So let's take a look at an example of this kit in use. So this slide shows a card with text and 3 icons. 2 of the icons require alt text to communicate their purpose to screen reader users. The 3rd icon is considered decorative. The Alley Annotation Kit provides labels which point to each icon with the recommended alt text. Providing alt text is a great example of designers working alongside the content team to communicate non-text alternatives to the engineering team. So we help bridge that gap. And that's it. That's my top 10 tools. Thank you for joining today. It's been a joy for me to share my love for making the world a more accessible place for everyone. And you can follow me on LinkedIn and Dribbble at Heather Designs and on Twitter at Heather Honey.
Thank you very much. I am going to open up the floor. We have about 20-ish minutes for questions. If you want to raise a question, you can use the raise your hand button, and we can then have the appropriate person answer said question. Or you can type in the chat if you don't want to use your voice out loud. Luca, go ahead. Thank you.
While Luca types his question, Kasey, when using your check sheet, is this more specifically to get an idea of who needs to be watching those particular success criterion and principles?
Yeah. One of the things with the success criteria is they weren't written with this particular role in mind. They were just written with as this is how you make the thing accessible. So if you're a developer, some of the things like creating an audio transcript, you're probably not going to be doing that for video, but a content creator would. So it's just meant to figure out what are the things you need to look at without things falling through the cracks. Like there's lots of checklists out there, but they're not really made unique for your team. So this is your kind of a way to make your own unique thing.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, Luca's question. Do you have advice for helping advocate for accessibility when others in your team may not prioritize it? I suppose we can open that to all 3 of you.
Who wants to go first? Kasey.
Kasey. I talk about it a lot, I think. Bringing up, explaining why, talking about the different types of disabilities. Something that we do at Sparkbox is we have a UX minute. I think they go out weekly where folks in the team will share about something accessibility related, and they put it in Slack for the whole team to hopefully read. So just keeping it on top of mind.
I would have to second that. I think education is huge. People don't always understand, especially if you're very able-bodied or you don't have any disabilities or any challenges. Just the education and learning what it's like for someone who does have challenges or disabilities or such, or even being able to make it more relatable in the context of there's temporary and situational, I don't want to say disabilities, but there are times when you find yourself, let's say, for example, if you have a mobility impairment and someone could have a permanent mobility impairment and somebody could have a temporary mobility impairment. And perhaps they were in an accident and they've broken their arm and now they don't have use of that arm. And so all of a sudden they understand what it's like to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And so being able to communicate that how when we build things that are accessible for, when we build things, we're actually improving everybody's lives.
I would agree with Heather on that, and Kasey as well. I am a member of the Milo 2 Accessibility Working Group, and probably one of the more vocal people to talk about accessibility at Milo 2. So I am constantly, just probably annoyingly, bringing it up frequently. So there is that. Additionally, it's important to me to get others to understand, because while I have what would be considered an invisible disability, I am diagnosed ADHD, so I have a cognitive disability, which generally speaking, I don't have to worry about it much with the work that I do because everything is fairly clean and organized. But like, there are instances that I will go to websites and, blogs, like you have to read blogs to sometimes update your knowledge and development, correct? Well, sometimes those blogs are monetized, and the amount of ads that are on those websites is just like maybe a little too much for me, and I'll just immediately leave the website. So like those are some of the things that I like to keep in mind, but also the fact that there are plenty of people out in the world. I think approximately like 15% of the world's population have a disability. So, it's very important to try to make what we work on as accessible and operable to as many people as possible. I think there were other questions.
Yep, there's a question from Emily. It's a question for Heather. Curious if there were any color contrast tools specifically designed for dark mode.
That is a great question. And
Stephen Gray left too soon.
yeah, and great question. And I don't have an answer for that. I am going to look it up though. I personally don't have any experience, or I don't have a lot of experience in designing for dark mode. I just haven't been had that type of work. So I haven't specifically looked for a tool in that area. But yeah, great question.
We have a question from Katie. It says, if I have an end user who is required to have certain characteristics, example 20/20 corrected vision, no color blindness, etc., how can I make sure I capture other aspects of usability that may be less visible? Put that up to any of you to answer. You can ask a clarifying question if necessary.
Well, in this instance, like I know that there are some roles within the government that you must have like 20/20 vision and no visual impairments. I do know that there are some roles because you don't want someone flying a plane that may have those problems. But in that instance, for like computer usage, definitely making sure that your keyboard controls are accessible. I know a lot of people that have transitioned out of the DoD and working on computers that like don't really use, they like to use keyboard navigation more than they do mouse or trackpad. So making sure you have a keyboard accessible app would be probably one of the best or the top solutions to that at that point. But Heather, Kasey, do you have other comments?
I think there's, even if the majority of your user base is going to have, not going to have these be impacted by, color blindness or visual impairments. I mean, first, like, is that really 100%? As folks, like, I'm sure at one point in my life I had 20/20 vision, and that's definitely not the case now. So, as people age, things change. Heather had also mentioned there's, it's not even just permanent disabilities, right? There's also situational and temporary impairments or challenges that folks might encounter. If I'm, carrying a kid and only have one hand to use, my computer or my phone, that's going to affect, I can't use both thumbs to type, like, I guess you don't use thumbs. I don't know. I think it's, instead of focusing on the specific, like this person has X ability or disability, just kind of run through like the full gamut when you're doing your testing. I always, every time I build something, I do a keyboard test. I make sure that I can use the thing with just my keyboard. That's going to catch a lot, like Brendan said. I make sure I can still zoom in, I think to 400%, make sure I can still use my web page. So it's, create a routine of like something that's going to catch all of the issues. And then if issues pop up, like nothing's going to be 100% accessible. Like there's always going to be accessibility bugs that will creep in. Someone's going to have a usability concern or something that will pop up, and you can tackle it then. But if you have a baseline of testing that you can run through every time you build something, it'll help you catch a lot of those issues. And then of course, also testing those success criteria.
I'll do a last call for questions. Doing the counting to 15 in my head. It's my facilitator training. Okay, since we don't seem to have any more questions, I want to thank the three of you for sharing these talks with us. And to everybody, thank you for coming. Like we said, the materials that we have will be available. I will be sharing them with you. And if you have any questions that you think of after the presentations, just follow up with us and we'll be sure to get you the answers that you need. So thank you for everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day.